Assalamualaikum, my name is Nurul Aini Fatihah binti Muhammad Hanafi. So now I will present the introduction of Al-Ariyah. Okay, lending activities are one type of social contact that occurs in everyday life, activities that practically everyone does daily. When no one has all, they need to satisfy their requirements. One option is to borrow it from someone else. According to Safrida and Syariah, Muamalah includes lending and borrowing since it is a regulation that governs human connections with other humans to satisfy their needs. Borrowing is one example of how humans will always require the assistance of others to achieve their wants. Okay. As we know that borrowing in Arabic is known as Al-Ariyah. Al-Ariyah means borrowing, which is to allow other people to take the benefits of something that is lawful in order to take its benefits without damaging the item and return it after the benefits are taken. Borrowing is allowed either by absolute means, not limited or limited by time. Transaction to run life without realizing it that in life always do Al-Ariyah contract. Okay, borrowing is done whether in the form of goods, money, or others. Especially at this time, a lot of events, dispute or riots in the community due to borrowing issues. It is not surprising that this issue arises in every society and ends up in court. This matter occurs due to their lack of understanding of their rights and obligations regarding the issue of borrowing. Okay, the study of loans, Al-Ariyah, the authors are interested in discussing consequences of Al-Ariyah agreement in fiqh muamalah maliyah, perspective of Madzahibul Ulama Al-Ba'ah, which the authors examines from various aspects, understanding law, consequences and others about borrowing, that there are no misunderstandings regarding the Al-Ariyah contract. Now I will present the definition of Al-Ariyah. Based on the article that we have found in 2018, Jamaluddin states that Al-Ariyah comes from Arabic, is taken from the word ar, which means come and go. According to some opinions, Al-Ariyah comes from the word Al-Ta'awur, which means equals, and Al-Tanawab means interchangeable exchange, namely in the traditions of borrowing. Meanwhile, according to the term, it can be said that a muamalah activity that provides the benefits of something lawful to others to take advantage of it by not destroy the substance, so that the substance can be still returned to the owner. According to Harun in 2007, Al-Ariyah means borrowing where a contract or agreement in the form of giving the benefits of a lawful object from one person to another without any compensation by not reducing or changing the item and will be returned after the benefits are taken. Okay, based on several definitions of Ariyah that have been put forward by the fiqh scholar above, there are similarities and differences. The similarity in defining Al-Ariyah is the possibility of using the other people's good without compensation. On the other hand, between this definition, there are differences where the Malikiyah and Imam Sharaksi scholars with the Shafi'iyah and Hanabila scholars regarding the use of goods borrowed only to the borrower and may lend to other parties. Okay, Malikiyah scholars and Imam Sharaksi said that Al-Ariyah is a contract that causes the borrower to have the benefit of the goods and that the borrower has. Therefore, the borrower may lend to the goods to other people to be used because the benefits of the goods have become his, unless the owner prohibits the borrower from lending it to another person. However, the Shafi'iyah and Hanabila scholars argue that the Al-Ariyah contract is only permissible in using the object. Therefore, the use is limited to the borrower only and may not lend to other people. Okay, now I will present the evidence of Al-Ariyah. In general, the original law of borrowing or Al-Ariyah is permissible. This is illustrated in the word of Allah SAW in Surah Al-Ma'idah verse 15, and help you in doing righteousness and piety, and do not help in sin and enmity. Fear Allah, indeed Allah is very severe in punishment. Okay. Al-Ariyah as means to help between the able and the impeccable, according to scholars of jurisprudence, based on the word on God in Surah Al-Ma'idah in verse 5, which reads, "Help each other in doing virtue and piety, and do not help one another in sins and transgression, and keep your duty to Allah, because Allah is severe in punishment." However, the law of mubah turns into sunnah if the borrowing is done to fulfill an important need, such as borrowing money for medical expenses. If the need is more urgent, the law can become mandatory. Okay, for example, lending clothes for the obligatory prayers, which if not borrow, the person concerned cannot pray because his clothes are unclean. Okay, the Al-Ariyah law can also become haram when borrowing goods to carry out immorality, for example, borrowing weapons to rob. Okay, meanwhile, for people who borrow goods, then he obligate to return them to the owner after the goods are used. Likewise, in the case of debt, the person who borrows money must pay it off when reaches the maturity agreed by both parties. Okay, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said the loan must be returned and those who bear something must pay and the debt must be paid. Okay, Hanafi scholars argue that the pillars of Al-Ariyah are only the consent of those who lend goods mu'ir. Okay, why Qabu is not pillar of Al-Ariyah? Because the contract of Al-Ariyah includes the contract that binds one of the parties. So, when someone says to someone else, "I lend you this part," then according to Hanafi scholars, it is valid and does not need to be accepted. However, according to Zufar ibn Huzail, an expert in Hanafi jurisprudence, in the Akad Al-Ariyah, it is necessary to accept. According to Shafi'ah scholars, in Al-Ariyah, the word side Akad is required. That is, the expression of consent and acceptance from the borrower and the one who lends the goods at the time of the transaction, because the use of the goods depends on the permission. In general, most scholars of jurisprudence state that there are several pillars of Al-Ariyah, namely mu'ir, that person who owes money. The member has the right to do good as he pleases, or the owner has the right to hand it over. People who are sensible and able to act legally, children and people who are forced are not allowed to lend something because they are not experts. Okay, the second pillar is musta'ir, which person who receive a debt must baligh and sensible. Okay, the next pillar is mu'ar, which things owed or borrowed goods. The borrowed material can be utilized, so it is not valid Al-Ariyah whose mu'ar cannot be used, such as borrowing a sack that has been destroyed so that it cannot be used to store rice. Okay, utilization is allowed by Sharia. Please help in matters of goodness. Then cancel the Al-Ariyah whose materials benefits are cancelled by Sharia. For example, a borrowed vehicle should be used for things that are beneficial in the Islamic view, such as bersilaturahmi, haji and so on. The benefits of the land goods are owned by lender, even by way of wakaf, or renting, because borrowing is only concerned with benefits, not with matters. Therefore, the person who borrows should not lend the goods he borrows, because the benefits of the goods he borrows are not his. Okay, his is only allowed to take it, but share the benefits he can take with others. There is no hindrance. For example, he borrowed a house for 1 month, but is only occupied for 15 days. Then the rest can be given to someone else. Okay, type of goods that when taken advantage of will not be consumed or destroyed, such as houses, clothes and vehicles. Not the kind of goods that when taken advantage of will be depleted or destroyed, like food. When the benefits are taken, the substance remains and not damaged. Okay, the last pillars is segoh, which ijab and kabul. Okay, ijab and kabul not required with certain words. If it still refers to the meaning of borrowing and borrowing. Okay, this left to local customs and the existence of compatibility between the words of consent and kabul. Okay, next I will explain the condition of Al-Ariyah. However, the condition of Al-Ariyah are detailed by the scholars of fiqh as follows. First, the person who borrows is the person who is rational and competent in acting in law, because the person who is not rational cannot trust to hold the trust. Okay, in fact, this Al-Ariyah item is basically a trust that must be maintained by the person who uses it. Okay, therefore, small children, innocent people and fools cannot make pacts or Al-Ariyah transaction. Okay, second one, borrowed goods are not a type of goods that when used will run out or disappear like food. Okay, types of goods they are not consumed or destroyed when used, such as houses, clothes and vehicles. Okay, the third one, the land good must be directly controllable by the borrower. That is, in a contract or transaction, Al-Ariyah, the borrower must receive the goods directly and can be used directly as well. Okay. The next one is the benefits of the borrowed goods include benefits that are permissible or permitted by the Sharia, such as borrowing someone else's vehicle, and the vehicle should be used for things that are useful in the view of Sharia, such as being used for silaturahim, pilgrimage to various mosques and so on. If the vehicle is used to go to places of immorality, then the borrower is reprimanded by the Sharia, even though the contract or transaction of Al-Ariyah is basically valid. This was criticized because it's used for not in accordance with the purpose of the Sharia, which is to help in good deeds. Okay, now I will present the legal provisions of the Al-Ariyah contract. Under basic law of Al-Ariyah, generally Al-Ariyah can be defined into types. Firstly, by hakikat. Borrowing or Al-Ariyah is a muamalah activity that takes advantage of an item without having the substance. According to Malikiyah and Hanafiyah scholars, the law is for the borrower without any substitute, or the borrower has something right with interest according to custom. The first and second group agree that the borrower does not have the same ownership rights as the mortgage of the goods. The borrower is only entitled to use it and cannot own the goods. Why? According to the first group, a mortgage is a customary or official contract, but Ariyah is a tabarruk contract. Okay, the second Al-Ariyah is by majazi. Ariyah in majazi is borrowing between measuring objects, skills, reckoning and others. For example, like eggs, money and everything you can imagine. In this case, the return must be the same as the goods borrowed. Therefore, it can be called Al-Ariyah in majazi way because it cannot be used without destroying its substance. Okay, after the basic law of Al-Ariyah, there are right to use loan items, that is musta'ar. Jumhur ulama other than Hanafiyah are of the opinion that musta'ar can utilize goods in accordance with the permission of the lender, which is mu'ir. Hanafi scholars are of the opinion that the power possessed by the musta'ar depends on the type of loan, whether the mu'ir lends binding or absolute. However, there are two types of Al-Ariyah, which Ariyah mutlaq means borrowing goods whose contract does not specify any requirements, such as whether its use is only for the borrower or allowed for others, or the use is not explained. And the other one is Ariyah muqayyad, means lending items are limited in the terms of the time and use. Both are required on one of them only. Okay, by law, musta'ar and musta'ir must as much as possible to maintain the limits, and limits include first, restriction of the use of Ariyah by the borrower. Second one is time and place limited, and the lastly is restriction of the size, of the weight and type.
Okay, next I will explain about the flows of the contract. From the article Jamaluddin 2018, Al-Ariyah is a contract in which an owner hands over to another person to own the proceeds of an item without consideration. So property borrowers are temporary and free and have a decision. This contract is organized and recommended as a form of permitted charity and debts. The property is entrusted by the borrower, who will not be liable for its destruction, loss, or deterioration unless it is caused intentionally or because of his fault or negligence. According to Shahnas 2015, Al-Ariyah provides benefits from physical property for a specified period without asking for any return. In simple language, land adoption. For example, lending books at the library, borrowing laptops, borrowing clothes, permission to occupy a house without payment. So Al-Ariyah occurs on the condition that the loan goods are not normally physically affected. So basically, the person who borrows the goods, they cannot be liable to replace the goods if any damage occurs, not due to his negligence. There are several things that cancellation or disappearance of the Al-Ariyah contract, which is when the person died on one side or both. As referred to Paringan 2015, if one of the Musta'i or Mu'ir dies, it is broken or the contract is lost, because Al-Ariyah agreement is certain that the owner or borrower can immediately return it. The second one is when the person got crazy from one side. In Islamic law, a crazy cannot be punished for anything, because even the data is said to have lost its conscious mind. So even in the contract, it cannot be accepted. Okay, the last one is when there is a problem with the return. According to Paringan 2015, it states that sometimes in returning loan items, defects often occur or the payback period exceeds the specified time limit. So that often a dispute arises from the Musta'i and Mu'ir parties. If this happens, then what is postponed is the oath of both parties. Similarly, regarding the status of the Al-Ariyah contract, the scholars also differed in opinion. Some of the scholars argued that the Al-Ariyah contract was not binding on both parties. According to Jamaluddin 2018, this means that the owner of the goods can cancel the loan whenever he wants, and the borrower may also return the borrowed goods item whenever he wants. Therefore, if the loan item is damaged, in principle, there is no compensation, which is daman, for the borrower if the loan item is damaged or lost. If the loan item is used within the limits of the item owner's permission, but if the borrower uses the loan item outside the allowed limit, the borrower they must replace it. In fact, borrowed goods are a mandate that must be returned. Bank financial institutions, Islamic banking, are engaged in financing activities, lending and borrowing. Al-Ariyah and various other financial services provided to serve the needs of the community and launch a payment system mechanism for all economic sectors. The application of Al-Ariyah in Islamic financial institutions is called Ariyah or I'arah. Basically, this application runs on an Ashliyah contract without any coercion like Ba'i, and of course without interest. According to Jamaluddin 2018, but even though the bank is labeled Sharia, the bank is still not able to implement Al-Ariyah purely Sharia. Islamic banks still use the interest system, but they use different terms. In a conclusion, Al-Ariyah, which is loan, is the giving of the benefit of an item to another person for free. In addition, if the borrower has held the loan item, then the item is damaged, he is obliged to guarantee it, either due to excessive use or because of others. Lending also can strengthen faith in increased gratitude. Life in this world is temporary, while life in the hereafter is eternal and eternal life. Every human being can reap the deeds one done during his life in the world by fulfilling all the rules and of God and carrying out all his commands and avoiding his prohibitions. That is what gives happiness in the world.